Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. Today on this channel, we're going to be talking about the fearful avoidant attachment styles, relationship to intimacy. So I made a video a while back that talked about why fearful avoidants often find it so difficult to move on after a romantic relationship has ended. And one of the key things that we talked about in that video is the fact that if you are fearful avoidant, you tend to find it extremely challenging to allow yourself to be really deeply seen and known by another person. And the reason this is so challenging for the fearful avoidant is because they have the same shame bind around a lot of their core emotions that those who err more dismissive avoidant tend to have. But because they also have access to their anxious wounding, they're aware of their internal experience as being highly emotional, as opposed to the dismissive avoidant who has more fully repressed those deep emotional wounds. And so the fearful avoidant can walk around feeling absolutely paralyzed and like they are completely unable to express their negative emotions in the majority of their interactions. So including things like social interactions, professional interactions. They might be very warm and engaging on the surface, but all of the deeply shameful stuff, they keep hidden down deep. And so the only place that stuff ends up coming out is in intimate relationships. Because if you go deep enough with another person, so particularly in romantic relationships, though this could happen in a friendship or a family relationship, all of that stuff that they don't want to come out because they feel as though it is wrong and bad ends up coming out. And so they end up having a type of intimacy that is exclusive only to the relationships where they weren't able to fully keep their self-control online. Because the fearful avoidant is generally trying to avoid all of that stuff coming out by carefully monitoring which sides of themselves they let other people see. So they might want to be thought of as incredibly cerebral and very intellectual, and as though they understand emotions but are above the authentic, raw experiencing of them. And then when they get close to someone and they get triggered, that stuff tends to come out. Someone else sees all of what the fearful avoidant is deeply ashamed of, which is, by the way, just human emotions that have become shame-bound. And then they likely feel a sense of intimacy with that person that they do not feel with anybody else. Now, all of us, even secure people, feel most intimate with others when they know us the most deeply. It is a human need to have the full range of our emotional spectrum be seen, empathized with, and to a reasonable degree understood by other people. So when the fearful avoidant achieves this inside of a relationship, often by mistake, as a result of the emotions that they try to keep pushed down, getting activated from a trigger, they experience intimacy, which is a human need that is very important. The problem is that if the fearful avoidant leaves that relationship, because often relationships are a place where they get frequently triggered and experience a lot of dysfunction, there is a high likelihood that there's now nowhere else they can go for intimacy. Now, today we're going to be talking about why it is so vital for fearful avoidants who are in the healing process to start developing intimacy outside of their immediate relationship. So if you have this attachment style, it means there is a significantly higher than average chance that it developed as a product of early abuse, or at the least of being frightened of your caregiver. So in a healthy dynamic, caregivers provide protection and comfort for their children. If your caregiver is the person that you need comfort and protection from because they are being abusive or otherwise scary and threatening to you when you are young, you now are in this dynamic where the only person you have intimacy with, the only person who sees your fear, your distress, your upset, your anger, is the person who is causing it. And so it's in your best interests to try to appease the caregiver, to find a way to return them to regulation so that they can then soothe you from the pain that they have caused. And so this can lead to fearful avoidants getting into intimate relationships, getting hurt or wounded within that relationship, and not having anywhere else to go because the brain automatically hyperfixates on getting their partner to change state and become regulated and grounded enough to give them the soothing that they need. This can lead to some deeply codependent dynamics, particularly if the fearful avoidant is in a partnership with someone who is emotionally unhealthy in some significant way. Even in the healthiest of relationships, when a rupture has happened, so when two people have had a disagreement or an argument, it's very normal for each person to take a little bit of space, go co-regulate with their other intimates, so their family members, their friends, their community members, and then come back to the relationship in a place where they are much more resourced to sort the issue out with each other. If you are a fearful avoidant, it's highly likely you think that inside of a partnership, your options are bail when things get tough and deactivate and go away from the relationship, or stay in the relationship with an obsessive focus on trying to re-regulate your partner and get them to a place where they are able to comfort your wounds. Again, this is part of a healthy repair process in secure dynamics, but it cannot be the only option that you have. If your partner is not ready to go there right away, if the relationship needs some time and space to breathe, you are going to need to have other intimate connections you can go to in order to avoid becoming codependent. So what we're going to do is we're going to start unpacking why fearful avoidants tend to fall into this position of being in what I call an intimacy desert, or having scarcity in their ideas around intimacy. And we're going to talk about how we can start reversing that process so that if you have that one close connection, whether it's a partner or a friend or a family member or a mentor, whatever it is, it does not feel like you are walking through a desert and they are the only oasis for miles. Again, that's a recipe for codependency and dysfunction. So when I was the deepest inside of my own fearful avoidant patterning, I distinctly remember feeling like the intimate connection that I had at the time was like this warm house I lived inside of, and the rest of the world was frigidly cold. And sometimes the heat in that house would go off. Sometimes I would have a fight with the person I was in that intimate connection with. And the problem is that if you really think about this situation, if you have a house that has heat 50% of the time, or even 20% of the time, or 10% of the time, and then you have an outside world where there is heating 0% of the time, it is going to serve your interests to stay inside of that house and become fixated with trying to get the heat to turn back on, rather than going outside of the house. Because outside, there's no chance of getting your intimacy needs met. But inside a relationship, however intermittent and however dysfunctional it is, there is a higher than 0 chance. And your unconscious knows this. So you're likely going to stay exactly where you are and keep fixating on trying to get the heat back on inside of your relationship so that you can feel warm again. And to track this metaphor with real life, what we're of course talking about here is when you are in need of intimacy, because all humans, when they get dysregulated, are in need of intimacy. If the only place you know how to get your intimacy needs met are within a given partnership, because you might not have self-intimacy, you are going to become fixated on getting that co-regulation from your partner, who, if they are in a fight with you, might not be resourced enough to give that to you. Your other option, of course, is to deactivate, which is essentially to walk out into the cold world and find ways to temporarily not feel the cold, which is to say, get away from the relationship and what it's bringing up from you, but at the expense of your emotional needs getting seen and met, which is a human need. And so the solution to this problem is not to minimize the fighting inside your partnership, though that might help. It's not to get better at avoiding your emotions, because that is not a long-term strategy. The solution is to learn to warm the outside world up. So the first problem we're going to look at here is the fact that you find it so challenging to develop intimate connections in a casual way, which is to say, in a way that you choose rather than a way that happens accidentally by all of your trauma coming up in the middle of an argument or some other high-pressure situation. If you have a fearful avoidant attachment style, I want to give credit to the fact that warming up the outside world is a Herculean task. It requires you going against all of that patterning that teaches you that there is something wrong, disgusting, and bad about you. and that if anyone really got to know you and really saw the full range of what you feel inside and what you think and who you are as a person, you would be abandoned forever. That is all of the stuff that other people need to see in you in order to develop intimacy with you. And so, what I recommend if you are really stuck here and you feel like there is absolutely no way you would ever be able to show yourself fully to someone like a friend or a new person who you would meet, I recommend starting with a therapist or a coach. So, someone who is trained to sit with people sharing their deepest, darkest experiences and can meet them with compassion. When I started doing this work for about the first year, the only person I had an intimate connection with was my partner at the time. And then I added in a therapist, and I learned to share myself in an honest and emotionally intimate way in that dynamic. And then, after about a year of practicing that, I developed one really deep, emotionally intimate friendship outside of the intimate relationship that I was still in at that time. And then over the next couple of years, I eventually learned to generalize those skills of connecting in a deep, authentic way to new friends and new community members until I had a circle of people I could go to who I felt truly knew me, both the good parts of me and the bad parts. But what had to happen first was I had to work with my therapist and with myself and through the help of a lot of support groups and a lot of workshops to stop thinking that my emotional experience was inherently shameful and wrong. And if that anybody learned how many feelings I had, they would be disgusted by me. That was a long and frankly still ongoing process, but it's the only hope we have as fearful avoidants for eventually reaching a place where we have enough intimate connections to sustain us, should our primary connection experience trouble. If you are fearful avoidant, you likely go into most scenarios wearing your avoidant mask. So you might be super warm, super friendly, super engaged, but you're likely still going into most social environments feeling as though you have to keep all those really deep parts of yourself hidden completely. This is, of course, different than someone with a more secure style, who, of course, does not immediately disclose all of their deepest, darkest, most shameful parts. But they will eventually, as they get to know people, disclose more and more of those parts until they have a variety of intimate connections, as opposed to the fearful avoidant who likely has the secret goal of keeping the parts of themselves that they're ashamed of hidden absolutely forever, to die with those parts of themselves unseen. And then again, that's all the stuff that comes up when you're triggered and accidentally ends up developing intimacy with other people. And this is, once again, not something you are consciously choosing, okay? If you have a shame-bound emotional self, it is hardwired into you to freeze and suppress any time you think that somebody's going to see that part of you. So, to start counteracting this problem, there is a kind of trick of the fearful avoidant patterning that I implore you to use to help you get better at this skill. Fearful avoidants tend to feel most comfortable and like they're able to drop their guards in situations where other people are vulnerable before they are. So if you can find yourself in environments where vulnerability is the norm, so things like going to support groups where there are explicit rules around vulnerable sharing and how that will be contained, or finding workshops or clubs that attract the kind of people who are ready to be very emotionally honest and vulnerable, you're going to have a much higher than average chance of eventually learning to drop that mask and become authentic with people in that environment. So surrounding yourself with highly emotionally intelligent people is going to be a really good move here. And this might be counter to your normal patterning. You might actually find it kind of threatening to be around really emotionally intelligent people because you might have this idea they're going to discover what's wrong with me. They're going to get in my head, they're going to see all the garbage, and they're going to find out that I'm a terrible person. When in reality, these are the types of people, if they have good functioning compassion, that are actually going to facilitate your healing journey the most. So some things we need to work on inside before we change what we're doing in the outside world. And in this case, I'm suggesting you do the exact opposite. You change your environment to include as many open, vulnerable, emotionally supportive environments as possible. You don't expect yourself to go in and immediately be able to be as open and vulnerable as everybody else. So you pay respect to your own defenses, which will be online at first. And over time, all you need to do is watch and observe other people's acceptance of vulnerable emotions, and eventually start very slowly disclosing more of your own. Even though it might feel very challenging, borderline excruciating to start doing that. A little bit at a time, you can start to learn the skill of intentional intimacy rather than accidental intimacy. And I do have 2 videos that I think are going to be really important for you to check out if this process feels very intimidating. One is on self-intimacy, so being willing to look at the parts of ourselves that we're really afraid of. And the second is on interpersonal intimacy, so how to wade slowly into that process. And I'll link both of those in the description of this video. And this all leads us to the last point, which is that the more exposure we get to intimacy inside of different relationships, the more we start to intuitively understand that one type of intimacy is simply not enough. So this original accidental strategy of only having intimacy with our partner or with one friend or whoever it is at a time was always doomed to fail because we need different types of intimacy that we can only get from different types of relationships. So we need things like friendship intimacy, where we can just totally and fully relax and know that there's a lot of space for us to be our more imperfect selves. We also might really need romantic intimacy, which might include things like sexual intimacy or planning a life alongside somebody else. That's its own form of intimacy. We might also need things like mentorship intimacy. So having dynamics that are more one-directional, where we're going to someone to learn and to receive care and support that isn't necessarily reciprocated. So the type of intimacy that comes from being seen by someone who serves as an enlightened witness for us. And then there are other forms of intimacy that might be more akin to family relationships, where people witness your change and growth over a long period of time. And so the idea here is that if you're looking for one person to meet all of those intimacy needs, it is absolutely going to fail as a strategy because some of those intimacy types are mutually exclusive. There's types of intimacy you can have with a friend that you just cannot have with a partner, and vice versa, because there are certain bounds around different types of relating. But if you're expecting a partner to be able to fulfill all of those needs for you, and especially if you expect them to just intuitively know which of those types of intimacy needs you need from them at a given point in time, it's going to be really, really messy. You cannot be all things to all people, and neither can anybody else. The only way you will break this habit of codependent relationships as a fearful avoidant is when you learn that you can get comfort and protection from people other than the person who hurt you. When you can do this, your relationships have a lot more breathing space. You suddenly retain the option to leave bad relationships and stay out of them. And you also resource yourself immensely, whether you are in a relationship or not, because now you have a lot more outlets for being deeply supported, as well as giving support to others and being part of meaningful communities where you're bringing your whole entire self to the table, not just that version of yourself that seems invulnerable. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to say on this topic for today. As always, let me know in the comments what you're thinking, feeling, any questions that come up as you're going through this video. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.